Everyone, welcome to our session. And it's very honored to be able to in this stage to share our research here. And in this talk, we will share how to abuse primitive and based on a different operation security concept. In this stage, we know the red team always try to compromise active directory environment because AD always is a very key asset in the enterprise environment. But also, blue team already aware one important thing is they already try to build kinds of detection prevention mechanism in their environment. So in this talk, we will try to leverage operation security concept to make sure the red team operation will success always. Okay, I'm Cheng. I'm the research manager of TS1 Networks, and I'm in charge of P-Cert and research team. Also, I'm the executive director of Association of Hacks in Taiwan. And this association is usually organize kinds of cybersecurity activity in Taiwan and Asia Pacific. And I organize the conference called HITB. So we already opened the call for paper. So if you have interesting, you can submit. And also I focus on ICS SCADA, IoT malware analysis, and enterprise security. Also spoken at the kinds of cybersecurity conference and instructor. And my partner Daster here, and Daster also is a researcher and work for TS1 too, and he's a supervisor of Association of Hacks in Taiwan. And also he focuses on red teaming, active directory security, and penetration testing. Also spoke at many cybersecurity conference and 2 certificate holder. And in today's outline, we will share, talk about the first things is active directory overview here, and also to display what is operation security. And then we will show the 4 real-world attack path demonstration here with video, and show you how to run the operation and how to consider what kinds of detection, kinds of OpSec concept to evade the detection. And finally, we will deliver a takeaway. So first, overview for Active Directory. So usually Active Directory is a directory service developed by Microsoft, and usually initialized is focused on the centralized management. But nowadays, AD already become the key asset for authentication, authorization in the enterprise environment. Is a very important asset. So we know that over 97% enterprise usually they use AD in their enterprise environment. So it's very important things. And also the 3 key protocol, key feature for Active Directory is they usually use LDAP, usually use Microsoft version Kerberos, and the DNS service. And also they integrate with kinds of service like single sign-on, ADFS. We will show the demo later. And why we talk about today's topic? Because blue team, when we perform the kinds of attack operation, we encounter kinds of routines by people. And they say, we already aware the importance of Active Directory, and we try to take some corresponding actions to detect, to prevent the AD attacks. So we know blue team do something here. Then we are red team guide, we are attack. We usually will provide more advanced things in the attack behavior. So we know we have operation security. But what is operation security for here is a key definition is we determine if friendly actions can be observed by enemy intelligence that can compromise the operations. It's a key concept. Just we want to try to find a way or many ways to defeat those detection or prevention mechanisms. So based on Active Directory, we leverage OpSec approach to the Active Directory. So we have this primitive. And in this primitive, in the bottom layer is also is co-concept for operation security. We know every attack actions be performed, we need to have every kinds of risk be detected. So we need to know when we perform kinds of attack, the operational action can be detected by the blue team. So based on this, we know usually attack use kinds of primitive or misconfiguration to compromise Active Directory. So those misconfiguration when those misconfiguration be abused, maybe some detection indicator happened. So we need to try to avoid this. So we conduct a conclusion for the OpSec steps for Active Directory. So first things is we need to enumerate the security posture of our target domain information. And second one is we need to find those possible detection indicator for the trackcraft used. And then we try to make those indicator align the baseline, because if we make those align the baseline, everything cannot be detected because it's like a normal behavior as a usual users. So this is our goal in the OpSec here. So now we already know the OpSec operation security. So let's show some demo here. We have 4 attack path demonstration. And every demonstration we will show the attack path here. And I have to say this is real world attack path we performed before, but we just built on a simulation environment in our lab. Will pass the operation understand. And then we will talk about some feature about the different technique we used, and then show the video demo, and I told you how to consider the OpSec operation security things. So first things in this first attack path is we focus on the attacker. Attacker will use Kerberos thing to get a user credential, to get a user MS SQL Service account credential. And based on we have this credential, we perform the pass ticket attack to the domain computer, MS SQL Server 01 here. And in this domain computer, we dump the ticket from this logon session, and we get a new user called Alicia. And this domain user, unfortunately, this user have the privilege for the DNS admin group. And we can abuse the DNS admin group privilege to make domain controller privilege and get the access to the domain controller. And we can deploy the ransomware via the group policy to compromise the whole entire domain. So before we talk about this, we need to focus on the key about the ATV directory authentication is Kerberos authentication. And basically, when we need to access a service, is a user, PC01 is a user, we need to send the AS request and response to get the creating ticket, TGT here, from the domain controller. And then, TGT is like identity for each user. And we will present this TGT to the domain controller, while steps 3 and 4, we get the service ticket back. For example, we want to access MS SQL Server. We will present our TGT and tell the domain controller, say, we want to access MS SQL Service. So please send back the service ticket for MS SQL Service back to us. And we can use this to access the service while the IP request and IP response here. So it's basically Kerberos authentication here. Then we will talk about each technique we use and quickly talk about this. So first one is Kerberos thing. And when we perform the Kerberos thing, we know when we want to use the service, so we will send the TGS request and response to get the service ticket. But focus on Kerberos thing. The service ticket will encrypt by the service account password hash. For example, the service ticket for MS SQL service, this ticket will encrypt by the service account password hash. The meanwhile is, so if we perform the brute force attack on this service ticket, we brute force the password hash, we get this service account credential. That is Kerberos thing. So basically, brute force and for those service account password hash. And second one is pass the ticket. Usually, ticket is the key for the domain, enterprise. But usually, attacker will use a stolen one or forged one Kerberos ticket to authenticate the domain account and as assistance. But we focus on pass the ticket, so not forged ticket. So if we want to pass a ticket, the first step is we need to obtain a ticket. But there are many ways to get a ticket. For example, we can steal one for the pass hash, or we can forge a golden ticket or silver ticket. We can dump the logon session to get those TGT or service ticket here. And last one is DNS admin, abuse DNS admin group. But before we talk about DNS admin, we need to focus on the DNS server management protocol. Because in this management protocol, there is a feature called server label plugin DLL. And this server label plugin DLL allow the DNS have a customized plugin user function. For example, if we want to use this server label plugin, we can use this one and send the command right into the registry key. Then we restart the we start the DNS service, we can get the command we want. Let's execute one command we want based on this feature, based on this server level plugin DLL in this registry path. We can use this. And last one is group policy. In this group policy abuse is very simple, guys. It's very simple idea is we have a right. For example, we compromise a user, and this user have some right, like edited right to the group policy, to the specific group policy, and we can abuse it. We can edit this group policy, or we have a domain access in the environment, so we can create one, edit any one group policy we want to use, and deploy this group policy to the entire domain, and we can run anything we want to. We can run any operation we want for precedence, for later movement, whatever. Everything we can do it. Okay, so let's show the video demo here. So this demo is from Kerberos team group policy abuse. Everything is first step is we need to enumerate the host information. We know the user mask, and we get a cache ticket. In the current logon session, have two tickets, one TGT and the other one is service ticket. And then we need to enumerate domain user information. Okay, so we get this domain user information mask. We know our mask is domain user only. So because it is our session here. And then we want to know the domain information about the domain name, about everything about the domain, what kinds of password, policy here, everything from every information. And then we want to try to focus on perform the Kerberos thing. So when we perform the Kerberos thing, with the Kerberos tool, Kerberos will find those user account with SPN set service principal name. So there are two service principal name account here. So we find the MS SQL service here. We copy the hash because we know the Kerberos thing attack is to perform the brute force attack. So we copy the Kerberos hash to the Kelly console, and we perform the brute force attack with the John or other brute force tool to get a plain text password here. And then we have a username credential, so we can perform the pass the ticket. Also, while the Kerberos ask TGT here, so we get the ticket for this MS SQL service account. It's a ticket gradient ticket, TGT here. And then we pass the ticket to a new logon session. Because this session is focused for the Mars user, but we have another user, MS SQL service, right? So we pass a ticket to this new logon session. And we can abuse this MS SQL service account's privilege. And we steal the token from the logon session here because we want to manipulate everything for the token, for the ticket, to make sure our operation smoothly, and we can use this the privilege for this user. And then in this step we impersonate the stolen token, and then we can use this user privilege via the ticket. So enumerate the cache ticket here. Now you will see the MS SQL service here for our ticket ticket here. Then we can make sure we can confirm we have a domain privilege for MS SQL server because we want to compromise MS SQL server here. And we have this privilege, and we enumerate who have a logon session in MS SQL service server, and we get ACL this user. So we want to later movement to this MS SQL server because we now have another user there. So maybe this user, this user is DNS admin here. So we know this user is privileged user because we can abuse DNS admin. So we perform the PS execute for later movement to this MS SQL server. Okay, so you will see we perform the PS execute here, and we have a new session. We have a new session here to leverage here. So in this moment, we already in the other MS SQL server here, and we check the TGT cache, and we get the Alicia user, so we can dump the ticket gradient ticket from this server because the logon session have this user. So we dump this user TGT, and we can also get the base 64 encoded ticket. We can copy this and change to PC01 section. And because we have hash, we have username, we have ticket, so we can also to pass a ticket to in the PC01. And in this part, we want to create a temp folder because we want to perform the DNS admin abuse. We want to make everything for the payload preparation, DNS abuse preparation here. So For the payload, we already preset it because we set the mask to the domain admin privilege here. So we just set up everything we need for abuse DNS admin, and we confirm the nature setup is okay, and we can also make sure the networking status is allowed or abuse because we have this machine privilege, right? So we can change the firewall for SMB 445. Then we perform the pass ticket to the list user. So we get the Rubus also again and to pass a ticket, to pass the ticket we have, and we perform the pass ticket. So this ticket session will import automatically, so we can use the user Alicia's privilege in Mars PC01 machine. Okay, so we perform the DNS admin abuse, and we can make sure the user Mars this privilege to promote it to the domain admin label, and we restart the DNS service because we need to restart it. The payload will be executed. Okay, so here we also revoke the token and make sure the payload execute result. So when we make sure the payload is payload, I say we leverage the domain admin privilege to English payload to the Mars. So we have Mars user have a privilege about the domain admin. So we can use this privilege to access domain controller. And in this part, we deleted the reduce key because we want to clean up the fingerprinting for the attack operation about the DNS admin. Because DNS admin operation is very, very easy to detect it because we need to run the command in the reduce key part. Okay, so after we have domain admin, we upload the payload to group policy abuse. We want to ransom this entire domain, so we run this operation here. So we upload some group policy, and we upload some ransomware to the nature folder, and create a malicious group policy for ransomware deployment. We use the some tool from the GitHub, and also add the computer task to deploy ransomware automatically. So we just make sure this group policy will smoothly to execute, and then we back to the other sample machine. And in the sample machine, we'll update the group policy and download ransomware. And this ransomware is a simple ransomware. And this simple ransomware will be executed and get a ransom in the entire domain. It's an operation, but focus on the real world behavior. It's the second one. It's the first one video demo. And then let's talk about the operation security concept. There are many techniques we present. We use it, right? So first things for Kerberos. There are two OpSec concepts we need to consider for Kerberos. First thing is we know when before we perform the Kerberos, we need to enumerate who registered service principal name in the domain. So usually, if you are a general attacker, you will use while LDAP query to query someone with SPN set, someone with service principal then here. So this attacker will use this query with LDAP to query one who have those SPN set. But so we know the detection indicator is blue team will find who query SPN set, right? But for our from OpSec view, from OpSec action, we just need to query a more genetic type every user, and after we query while LDAP, we just filter who have SPN set. So that in that moment, the blue team will not know what operation you want to execute because you just query LDAP here. Okay, so it's first things, and then usually Kerberos always will request the service ticket. So when we request, there I have event log here 4769. We'll get the ticket information. The service ticket was requested, so I have event log. Usually they are very mature for this detection because there are two detection indicator for this Kerberos detection. One is ticket options, the other one is encryption type. And ticket option usually will be detected such as Rubus. They will use the ticket option end of 01, 010 here because default is 3 old, end of 3 old. is by default. So it's something different. So this first indicator for detection. And second one is encryption type is RC4, 0x17, because RC4 encryption usually is more easily to use the brute force attack. So we can do this, and detection can do this. So for OpSec, we can use the encryption type for AES-256, but more hard to brute force, but booting are hard to detect it. And also, we can use some tool from TrustSec. This tool can help us to make those service ticket requests to send us a baseline, send us a default status. So it's for co-bursting here. Then pass a ticket. So before pass ticket, we will run as request and response. But for normal behavior, if normal user requests as request and response, usually they will encounter a situation in the left side is Windows will request TGT without pre-authentication. So we'll get error here. It's a normal behavior. It's normal situation. And after this first time the AS request get error, they will perform the second time. And the second time operation with pre-authentication information in the packet. But if you use Rubrus or other hacking tool for open source, they will send the AS request with pre-authentication by default. So it's an indicator. It's an indicator here, first one. So how to bypass this? How to make sure this action can smoothly? We just add OpSec handle to the Rubrus, and we will have as a baseline operation here. We will send the AS request without pre-authentication, and then send the AS request with pre-authentication here. So the pass ticket we can make this happen. And next one for pass a ticket is import behavior. We need to import authenticate, right? So because we want to use this privilege, this ticket privilege. So the possible detection indicator is import behavior. And this import behavior will make your logon session have two different users. For example, Morris's logon session have Dexter ticket. It's a very abnormal and suspicious situation. So it's a detection indicator. But for OpSec, we don't have any method now for bypass this. So we need to make sure after our operation complete, we need to collect this fingerprint as soon as possible. So for here, for OpSec action. And then when we perform a dump ticket, we will run the register logon process with LSA handle. We want dump ticket. And if you use Rubrus to dump the ticket, in the Rubrus code, you will find here, hang on. You will find these things here is detection indicators. They will register logon process, use a logon process with 3S here. It's in the Rubrus feature. So this detection indicator, we saw some routine will make this as an indicator to detect who uses Rubrus to perform a dump ticket. But for OpSec action, we need to review everything, every tool we use before we perform the action, perform attack action. So make this to remove the extra S here. Okay, so it's dump ticket. Then DNS domain abuse. So we know this after DNS domain abuse, this detection indicator is the register key is populated. So we need to perform the attack action is remove the configuration after we perform the this action complete, or we already be the member of DNS admin, and we can leverage this until-relate attack, another technique, to make those extended DNS record with DNS admin permission. Make this without any register key be is populated, so we can perform the same operation here. So this is for pass 1 OpSec action here, and the pass 2 and pass 3 I will hand over to Dexter, and Dexter will introduce this for us.
Hello. Do we have audio? Hello. Okay. So for the pass 2, we want to demonstrate how we can abuse certificate template and use that to compromise the entire domain. We're going to start by abusing a vulnerable certificate template and use that template to impersonate a privileged domain user. After that, we'll have the domain elevated access to compromise the domain controller. And while on the domain controller, we'll leverage unconstrained delegation abuse to combine with the printer block, the coarse authentication method we'll introduce later in the slide, and use that to compromise another foreign domain. Okay, so let's start by talking about what is certificate template abuse. So what we're seeing here is a certificate enrollment process, which in simple words is just how we are requesting a certificate. So when we're abusing a certificate template, the general idea is to request to, or we can say enroll a certificate as a privileged user by abuse a vulnerable setting on the template. So what's considered to be like a vulnerable template that can be abused that allow us to impersonate a privileged user? So first thing we see is a enrollee supply subject flag. This flag exists on the certificate template itself. When this flag is enabled, we can specify the certificate. We can specify the user using the subject attorney name. This is the field on the certificate. So next thing we see is excessive permission on the enrollment agent certificate. When there is like excessive permission, we can just specify the user, like a privileged user on the subject name of a certificate. The third one is the added attribute subject all name to. This is a flag on the certificate authority, the CA itself. When it is present, the abuse effect is the same as the first one, enrollee supply subject. So after we obtain the certificate, when the setting allow is usually like a domain authentication, we can use this certificate for the Kerberos authentication, which is also called the PK inits. The AS request and response is largely the same, except that the authenticated package, as we are seeing the timestamp, is encrypted by the certificate private key instead of the password hash. So the next abuse primitive, we have the unconstrained delegation abuse. So the general idea is that when this setting is enabled, the computer, every user accessing the computer will also send another copy of granting ticket to this computer. So that simply means that if we compromise a machine that has unconstrained delegation setting enabled, we can dump various user granting ticket on this computer. For the last abuse primitive of this attack path, we have the DC sync. So there can be like multiple domain controller in a single domain. Like a changing one DC have to sync to another domain controller, like a password. So domain replication is needed for multiple domain controller to function properly in one domain. And in addition, like how we see on the slides here, okay. Never mind. So the DS replication get changed and DS replication get changed. Oh, these are the permission required to perform the DC sync or the domain replication. And in other words, that means if we compromise a user or or the computer account, we can perform the DC sync ourselves, the domain replication, and use this method to obtain the password hash of various accounts, like domain administrator, like a domain controller, which can be used as a lateral movement or can be used for the persistent as well. Okay, so let's see our first attack path. We will start. Is it started? Okay, so we'll start by using search utility to determine if ADC is installed in the environment. And after it is confirmed, we're going to enumerate the vulnerable certificate template. Give it a little second. And now we're seeing that there is actually one certificate template enabled with enrollee supply subject flag and flag is it. And the next thing is the enrollment right. We're seeing the authenticated user. That basically means everyone can enroll this certificate. So the next thing we're doing is enroll the certificate while specify the domain administrator in the subject attorney name. And now enrollment process is complete and it needs a little bit of tuning before we can put it into use. So we're going to copy that into a local machine and convert it to a PFX format. After we convert it to the PFX format, we're going to encode it in a base64 format. And by using the base64 string of a PFX certificate, we can now use it in a fileless way with Rubius. We can present the certificate and ask for a ticket granting ticket. As we're seeing here, now the ticket is requested and it is imported to our logon session. We can now lateral movement to a domain controller using PSXapp. And just give it a little second, we'll have the beacon on the domain controller calling back to us in this C2. Okay, now we have the beacon on the domain controller. So we're going to enumerate a little bit about the domain trust for a lateral movement opportunity. As we're seeing here, we actually found a forest trust setup, which is bidirectional access allow, and it's a forest. And so the next thing we do is to find a DC on this foreign domain, the foreign forest, so we know which computer we need to communicate with for abuse. And the next thing we do is we're going to leverage the printer bug. So after leveraging the printer bug, we'll have the TGT ticket on this domain controller, and we can dump it and import it to our logon session. After import it to our logon session, we can, so here's a command where imported. Now we're impersonated as the foreign DC in the forest, and we can perform the DC sync and obtain the administrator from the foreign domain, the password hash. So the next thing we do is using the password hash to ask the ticket, and again, import it to our logon session. And while impersonate as administrator for the foreign domain, we can use PSXact again and lateral move to the foreign DC. As we seen lastly, we have the beacon on this DC, which is from the foreign forest. So after the demonstration, let's look at operation security for the first abuse primitive, which is a certificate template abuse. So a possible indicator can happen that defender can monitor the enrollment events for the subject name or the subject attorney name for a high privilege account. So a way to counter this as a operation security action is that instead of requesting a certificate using the crazy high privilege account like administrator or the member of domain admin, we can specify the account, which is like having the right that we just need. So for example, if we want to perform a DC sync attack, we can have an account who is maybe in the exchange server group, like trusted group, like domain group. Or if we were trying to lateral move to a specific machine, we can enumerate and try to find who's happened to be the local admin of that machine. So we can specify that in the certificate and use the certificate to impersonate the user and lateral move to that specific machine we want to compromise. For the next abuse primitive is after we having the certificate, we're providing this certificate and use it for the Kerberos authentication, and which is called the PK init. So there is a possible indicator when we're using the certificate for Kerberos authentication is that the event for 768, which is for showing the TGT requests, when we're using the certificate information, there will be some value. And since this is how this mechanism works, there's nothing we can really do to counter this indicator. So instead of an action, we have a risk here is that when we're trying to do that before that, we can enumerate this target domain and try to see if this enterprise have similar certificate usage, like they're using the smart card or something like that. And otherwise, using the certificate for Kerberos authentication will be easily stood out. Like it just violate the environment baseline of this target environment. For the next abuse primitive, we have the unconstrained delegation. And so in this attack path specifically, we are abusing the unconstrained delegation on the domain controller and combined with printer bug to obtain a TGT from the foreign DC and dump this TGT. So a possible indicator can be happened by the LSAS activity on the domain controller. And since DC is always defined as a tier 0 asset, so any like LSAS, like how we are dumping a credential, can be heavily monitored and it just alerts the blue team. So a possible action to counter this indicator can be like, instead of leveraging the printer bug and constraint delegation on a domain controller, in a situation like that, we're having a domain admin or administrator. We can configure ourselves a unconstrained delegation setting computer where there is no heavy guard like DC, and safely dump our TGT in that customized PC we just configured by ourselves. Okay, so for the last abuse primitive of this attack path, we have the DC sync. And it can be specifically monitored, which is a huge indicator of a DC sync attack, is by monitor for the ds-get nc change request from a machine that's not supposed to perform the domain replication. So there can be one way, like a possible one action to counter this indicator is by we try to find a machine that might be in the white disk. So what are we meaning by what might is that this machine can be the AAD connect machine, or if we're trying to avoid a DC sync detection, we can just have a shell. But there's a risk is that DC is defined as a tier 0 asset, so a little bit of trade-off, and it will depends on how the scenario, how the environment we have in the operation. For the third attack path, we want to demonstrate how we can start it from the password spray to obtain more privileged access, and using the access for the ACL abuse and shadow credential, which is an implementation of ACL abuse. And after having the shadow credential configured, we can use unpack the hash with silver ticket and compromise the ADFS server. Finally, after compromising a ADFS server, we will perform the ADFS golden SAML, where we'll forge a SAML token and impersonate as another account and access the Outlook. So let's see our first abuse primitive, which is password spray. So password spray is just a form of brute force attack where we're leveraging a service that service will check for the validity of the credential, and we're leveraging that for checking each user's password. And password spray, what password spray different from a regular, like general brute force attack is that instead of trying each possible combination on a single account, when we're performing the password spray, we're trying the same password on a different account, like different domain disks. Why we're doing this is that we're trying to avoid account lockdown, which usually happen as configured in the domain. For next abuse primitive, we have the SEO abuse. So in general, we can think of everything in the Active Directory is stored and managed as domain object. So in that case, every object can grant the access to a certain principal, like a user account or a computer account. So we can leverage this access for like domain lateral movement. For example, if we're having a force change password that's ACL writes, we can just compromise another domain account by just changing the password as it manifests itself. So another example is that when we're having ACL write, such as like a full control to a domain group, and this group happen to be the domain controller group, we can just add our account to this group and have the permission for have the ACL write, the permission for the desysing attack. Okay, so for the next abuse primitive, we have the shadow credential. So shadow credential is a form of the ACL abuse, like an implementation for the ACL abuse. And the original purpose is to configure a specific certificate that will be used for domain authentication for the account without the ADCS, the Active Directory Certificate Service install. However, this is being abused by attacker from the ACL. When having an ACL rights, we can configure our own certificate on this account and use the certificate to authenticate as an account and impersonate this account and abuse its privilege or try to use its account for more lateral movement or persistence. For the next is the unpack the hash. And so when we're asking a ticket granting ticket from the certificate, this ticket granting ticket, this ticket will have the RC4 password hash embedded in the pack of this ticket. So the original purpose is to enable the NTOM authentication for PK init because there's actually no password hash. And what we can leverage this is by requesting a U2U service ticket and obtain the RC4 by decrypting it using the TGT session key. And we're going to later use the password hash, which happen to be a computer account for the silver ticket, which we're seeing here. So silver ticket it's been known for a while, and is a way to forge the service ticket, which is the key, the password hash of a service account. And by forge a service ticket, the silver ticket, we can impersonate a privileged account, usually the domain administrator or the member of a domain admin account, and we can access the service with elevated access. For the final abuse primitive, we have ADFS golden SAML. And before we can forge a golden SAML, we have to first have the credential for the ADFS. And the two things we need is the first thing is the key for the ADFS, which is called a KDS key. And the second thing is the configuration information, which can be how the issuance roles being configured or like a certificate for the ADFS. And after having the credential, we can forge the SAML token. And as we're seeing on the red circle there, we can exchange the SAML token to the one we just forged and have access, access for other domain accounts, such as administrator or like CEO account, which can be just specified like everyone as any account we want, we can just specify with SAML token. So let's have a look at the third attack path in this video demonstration. We'll be started by enumerating the domain information and also the password policy. So later we're going to perform the password spray attack. And here we're performing a password spray, and looks like we got lucky to have one account brute force password found. The next thing we do is use this brute force credential and ask for a ticket granting ticket. And we're going to import this ticket to our logon session, like automatically by providing the PDT handle from the Rubius. So this account, after digging a bit, we found that this account has a full control to an ADFS server, and it was inherited from a domain group. So the next thing we do is leverage this ACL write to configure the shadow credential, the certificate for the ADFS server. And after configure, we're gonna ask the ticket granting ticket of this ADFS account and use the unpack the hash to have the ADFS server account password hash. As we're seeing here, the NTOM password hash just obtained from the PK init TGT. And the next thing we do is using the password hash to forge the server ticket as an administrator to access the ADFS computer system. So as we're seeing right here, the ticket is requested and imported to our logon session. And now, before we later move to the machine, we just want to check. And here we're seeing the output, meaning that everything is good. And we can use the PSXF for lateral move to the ADFS server. Now we're in the ADFS server. We can dump the credential from it. So from the output, we can see the configuration information, such as the issuance role, and other thing included is the certificate and the KDS key. So we will perform, before we perform for the SAML token, we have to convert it to the usable format, such as like DKM key and the certificate. And now we're ready to forge the SAML token. And these are the SAML token that represent the administrator, the domain administrator. We're going to copy it first, and we're going to use this SAML token later. So how we're going to use it is started by fake ADFS login with the account we just compromised from the password spray. And we're going to intercept this HTTP request with burp. So we can exchange the SAML token with the one we forged, as we're seeing here. This is the original one, and we're going to replace the one we just forged. Now everything is fine and it's good to go. Now we're accessing the Outlook as domain administrator. So just give it a second. Now, as showing on the top right, we're logging in as administrator. So this is how it looks when performing the golden SAML attack. So now let's have a look at the operation security for the abuse primitive used in this attack path. The first one, let's see the password spray. So the possible indicator for the password spray can happen from high volume of logon failure or the account disabled in a short period of time. A possible action to counter this indicator can be done by increasing the time between each brute force attempt. So it will like lower the volume of logon failure. And another thing we can do is try to check the counter of bad password attempt. So we're not exceeding the threshold and disable the account. For the next abuse primitive, we have ACL abuse for shadow credential. As we're seeing here, there's no possible action we can do to counter this indicator. This is because that this, as we see from previous abuse primitive, this is how the mechanism work. We cannot do anything to change that. So one thing to remember is that defender might monitor the specific attribute, which is the MSDS key credential link. This is an attribute for configure the certificate for shadow credential abuse. And it could easily stood out in an environment as if this target environment, they don't use this sort of certificate usage. For the next abuse primitive, we have unpack the hash for server ticket. So a possible indicator can happen is that when we're forging a server ticket, the encryption type is different from the baseline encryption type, which often is the AES256. And since our password hash is obtained from the ticket granting ticket and it's limited to the RC4, our server ticket is also limited to the RC4 as well. So a way to counter this is that when we're configuring the shadow credential, instead of leveraging unpack the hash and server ticket, we can leverage S4 to self to impersonate a privileged user for access. So here we're seeing the first picture is that we're performing the S4 to self through the PK init. And After that, we're going to perform S4 to sell and obtain the service ticket to that service, to the computer service account itself. And in this way, we will not be limited by the encryption type, which means that we can just specify the encryption type and align to the environment baseline. So we can counter the possible indicator we just seen earlier. For the final abuse primitive, we have the ADFS golden sample. So ADFS server is also defined as tier 0 asset. So that means that the place that save the credentials, such as database and registry key, can be heavily monitored by the defender. So instead of dump this credential locally, we can try to dump them remotely. So this can be done for the DKM key, we can leverage LDAP and DC sync to dump them remotely. And for the configuration such as certificate or the issuance role, we can leverage ADFS replication service. Okay. Now, for the rest of the attack paths, let's have Mars.
The final attack path here, we will leverage printer bug to the shadow credential. So the first attack will have a domain user credential and to leverage chorus authentication with NTL relate and shadow credential to get EX01 server permissioned. And we can leverage this exchange server to this user to leverage to DC sync to get the KRBDGT password hash, and we can perform the diamond ticket and SID history injection to the cross-domain, cross-forest attack. So in this scenario, in this attack, we perform the attack cross-domain from the corp.local domain to site.local domain here. So first technique we use is NTL relate and shadow credential. And for the NTL relate, we use the cross protocol relay here from the HTTP to LDAP. And as an attacker side, we make sure the web DAP or other service we need is initiated and running. And we can leverage this from the HTTP to our target server to make this relay happened and get the permission, the privilege, the authentication package we want. After that, we perform the shadow credential. So we send the certificate to MSDS a key credential link attribute to the server. We can request the certificate without the CS server running. And then we send the step 8 to send the certificate request to request TGT while PK init and get a ticket here. So we have a ticket now in this part. And then we leverage diamond ticket attack technique. And diamond ticket, before the guide for diamond ticket is we need to get the KRBDGT password hash first. And then we add the privilege group to membership, to the membership attribute of pack. So for example, if we want to add this ticket with add the domain admin privilege, we just want to add the domain admin group number to the membership attribute of pack. So this ticket have this domain admin privilege. So for a diamond ticket, first things we need to have a ticket and the KRBDGT password hash. Then we can modify the field we want in the pack. Okay, this is diamond ticket. And next one is SID history injection. Usually this technique is used to leverage the cross forest trust attack. So also, the SID history, we need to have a KRBDGT password hash. And we add the SID to the SID history field because this SID history field can be identified, can be used to the forest domain trust here. For example, if we want to add additional identity, for example, domain admin 512, and we just add this SID to the SID history part and send this ticket to another domain. We have a domain admin privilege in the another domain. Okay, so we will show them later. And so in the left side of this slide is normal ticket without the other SID, extra SID. But in the right side, we inject another SID end of 500. And we add the administrator privilege to this extra SID field, and we get the privilege for this ticket. So we know the SID history injection, and we also have a KRBDG password hash. So now this is cover authentication for the forest trust. And for this process, we need to have the KIPDG password hash, right? So in the app layer 1, we have this one, and we perform the SID history injection here in the app layer 1 after step 2. And then we set the TGT with modified SID history to the domain controller. And this attribute will inherit to the every TGT have. So we have this modified TGT to send the site b.local to access this load service with the extra domain privilege. So this for SID history attack. So now the final attack path here, we leverage printer block for the shadow credential. And in this attack, we also enumerate the name pipe for the SMP IPC $share. And then we want to know the service we target is running or not. So we also enumerate principal service is running or not, and the web dev client service running or not. So after checking, and we host an NTL relay server for shadow credential attack. So here is shadow target for EX01 site is computer account here. So, and then we perform the printer block attack to leverage those attack to make the authenticated package to our NTL relay server, and we get the certificate and the ticket. And also we pass the certificate for the PK init and get the TGT here after we perform this shadow credential. And then we unpack the hash attack to dump the NTL hash. And when we dump the NTL hash, we have this exchange computer account. We have a password hash. We have every credential for this computer account, and we run the DC sync to sync the domain controller to request the KIPDG password hash to us. And then we can perform the diamond key and the SID history. In the step, in this command, in the last command, we run the SID history and the diamond key in the one command to here. So we inject this ticket. We have a diamond ticket with domain and main privilege. We have SID history can cross domain. So we can use this ticket to access the DC01 site b.local, the other one domain controller, and we have access right here. Also, we can make the pre-execute for the later movement for the domain controller. So get the other access to cross forest trust. So this is our final demonstration demo here. And also, in the OpSec security for the diamond ticket, and we only talk about, in this attack path, we only talk about this one. The key concept for diamond ticket is modify the membership of the pack for the TGT. So you also get the other event log in the right side. 4627, you will get a domain admin in your group membership in your event log. So if you want to evade this, so because this indicator in the event log, you will see this one. So for the OpSec action, we can leverage another tag to leverage SVR to self and U to you to make the operation stand, but we don't have to make this event log happen. We can evade this attack, make this diamond ticket for OpSec. Okay, so it's the final one for our attack demo. And let's get to the takeaway here. So for summary for this talk, few things I want to deliver here is for abuse primitive is a main trend for attacking active directory, and they are hard to complete, prevent, and detect it because primitive is very, very feature for active directory. So unlike vulnerabilities, they are hard to patch, hard to prevent it. So we can abuse this. It's a feature. And then also, Blue Team also know that, so they want to try to deploy more and more detection mechanism to the layer active environment. So for the attack side, we need to think about the operation security every time when we perform the attack action and operation. Before we perform this, we need to take care the OpSec concept here, and we can make the attack operation always a success. So that is our key point here, and I want to deliver here. So I think it's end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.